You're crying, the child states matter-of-factly, though Talia hadn't realized tears were falling. Katya says crying is okay because it means you're strong enough to feel things. Are you strong? The question is so unexpected, so beautifully backward in its logic, that Talia actually laughs, a broken, watery sound. I don't feel very strong right now. That's okay, the girl says with absolute certainty. Katya and Papa will protect you. They protect everyone who's sad. Before Talia can process this strange statement, a woman appears, and appears is the only word for it, because one moment the space is empty, and the next, she's there. Katya Romanova, dressed in black from neck to boots, moves like violence given form. Her pale eyes lock onto Talia with an intensity that stops breath. Zvezda. What did I say about talking to... Katya's words die as she truly sees Talia's face. Something flickers across her expression, recognition of pain, perhaps, or a memory of her own, before her mask slams back into place. Then Viktor Romanov materializes at the restaurant entrance, and every survival instinct Talia possesses screams predator. He surveys the room with practiced menace, his gaze landing on his daughter, then Katya, then, with unsettling focus, on Talia. He says something in Russian, sharp and urgent. Katya's entire body tenses. They found us, Katya translates unnecessarily, because the three men entering through the kitchen door, hands in their coats, make the situation horrifyingly clear. Katya grabs the child with one arm and Talia's forearm with her other hand, her grip bruising. Stay close, stay quiet, and do exactly what I say. You witnessed nothing, understood? Viktor is already moving, positioning himself between them and the threat, and somehow incomprehensibly, Talia is being pulled along as the Romanov family makes their escape, dragged from her lonely Christmas Eve into a nightmare she can't begin to understand. The last thing she hears as they burst into the alley is Viktor's cold voice, directed at her for the first time. You see nothing, you remember nothing, or you disappear. The SUV's tires crunched through fresh snow for what felt like hours, though Talia's phone, confiscated immediately, meant she had no way to measure time's passage. She sat wedged between Katya and the child, whose small hand had found hers in the darkness and hadn't let go since. Across from them, Viktor made low, clipped phone calls in Russian, his voice a constant reminder that she was no longer operating in a world she understood. When the vehicle finally stopped, Talia looked up to see something that made no sense. A mansion that belonged in a European winter postcard, not whatever remote location they'd driven to. The house rose from the snow-covered landscape like a fortress disguised as a palace. Stone and timber, 3 stories, with soft golden light spilling from mullioned windows. Armed men in dark coats materialized from the shadows, opening doors, speaking in hushed tones to Viktor. Out, Katya ordered, already pulling the child with her. Talia's legs barely held her as she stepped into snow that reached her ankles. Her thin coat, chosen for an indoor date, not a kidnapping, provided no protection against the wind that cut through the trees surrounding the property. She stumbled, and Katya's hand shot out, steadying her with surprising gentleness before immediately withdrawing. Inside, the house revealed its contradictions. Opulent, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, oil paintings in gilded frames, but also fortified. Security cameras nested in corners, windows too thick to be ordinary glass. Men stationed at intervals, their weapons barely concealed. This wasn't a home, it was a beautiful cage. Viktor disappeared immediately into what looked like a study, his phone already pressed to his ear. Katya led Talia and the child through hallways that smelled of pine and something expensive, cognac perhaps, or imported cologne. They ended up in a sitting room dominated by a fireplace where flames crackled behind an ornate screen. Sit, Katya said, not unkindly, gesturing to a leather sofa. Talia sat. The child immediately climbed into her lap, burrowing against her chest as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. Talia's arms came around the small body automatically, protectively, even as her mind screamed that nothing about this situation made sense. Katya poured something amber from a crystal decanter, downed it in one motion, then poured another. She stood with her back to the fire, backlit and beautiful and terrifying. For a long moment, she just stared at Talia, her ice blue eyes conducting some kind of assessment. "My name is Katya Romanova," she finally said, her accent thickening with exhaustion. "That is Viktor Romanov, and this," she gestured to the child in Talia's lap, "is his daughter, Anya. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time." "I don't understand," Talia said quietly, her archivist's brain demanding context, patterns, explanations. "Who were those men? Why did I take you?" Katya's laugh was sharp, humorless. "Because Anya spoke to you. Because you were seen with us when the Volkov family soldiers opened fire. Because in my world, witnesses don't get to walk away and pretend they saw nothing." The child, Anya, stirred against Talia's chest, and Talia found herself stroking the girl's hair without thinking, the gesture instinctive. Katya's eyes tracked the movement, something flickering across her face too quickly to read. "So what happens to me?" Talia asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Perhaps this was shock. Perhaps this was simply her nature. When faced with chaos, she searched for logic, for the underlying structure that would make sense of disorder. "That depends," Katya said, setting down her glass. She crossed to the sofa, sinking into the opposite end with a weariness that aged her. Up close, Talia could see the faint scar along her jawline, the way her hand never strayed far from the weapon at her hip. On whether you can follow simple rules, on whether Victor decides you're a liability, or... She paused, glancing at Anya. "Something else." "I'm not going to tell anyone anything," Talia said. "I don't even know what I saw." "You saw enough." Katya leaned her head back against the sofa, closing her eyes briefly. In that moment, she looked almost human, almost vulnerable. The Volkov family has been trying to move in on Romanov territory for months. Tonight was their first open attack, clumsy, desperate, which makes them more dangerous, not less. Talia processed this, her mind working through implications. "And I'm leverage now, insurance that I won't go to the police." Katya opened her eyes, and there was something like surprise in them. Most people would be crying, begging, demanding to call a lawyer. Would any of that help? No. Then it would be a waste of energy. Talia looked down at Anya, who had fallen asleep against her, the child's breathing deep and even. "She's exhausted." "She's been through hell tonight," Katya said softly, and for the first time, real emotion cracked through her armor. She saw things no child should see. "So did I," Talia admitted. "But at least I have context for violence, for danger. She's 4 years old." Something shifted in Katya's expression, the assessment changing, recalculating. She leaned forward, studying Talia with new intensity. "What's your name?" "Talia. Talia Bennett." "What do you do, Talia Bennett?" "I'm an archivist. City records. I organize documents mostly. Immigration files, property deeds, historical..." She stopped, realizing how absurd her ordinary life sounded in this extraordinary situation. But Katya was nodding slowly, as if Talia had just confirmed something. "You're used to seeing patterns, making sense of chaos. I suppose." "That's rare." Katya stood abruptly, as if the admission had cost her something. "There's a bedroom upstairs, second door on the left. You'll stay there tonight. Don't try to leave. Don't open windows. Don't use a phone if you find one." She paused at the doorway, her back to Talia. "And don't hurt that child. If you do, I'll make sure you regret living." "I would never." "Good." Katya glanced back over her shoulder, and her expression was unreadable. "She likes you. That complicates things." Then she was gone, leaving Talia alone in the fire-lit room with the sleeping child in her arms, and the dawning realization that her life, the one she'd been convinced was so small, so forgettable, had just been completely, irrevocably shattered. Talia woke to find Anya's face inches from her own, the child's brown eyes studying her with unsettling intensity. Beyond the window, dawn painted the snow-covered grounds in shades of rose and gold, beautiful and isolating in equal measure. "You stayed," Anya whispered, as if this were somehow remarkable. "I didn't have much choice," Talia said gently, sitting up. Her body ached from sleeping in yesterday's clothes, from the adrenaline crash, from the fundamental wrongness of everything. "Papa wants to see you. Katya said I should let you sleep, but Papa doesn't like waiting." 15 minutes later, after washing her face in a bathroom more luxurious than her entire apartment, Talia found herself standing in Viktor Romanov's study. He sat behind a massive oak desk, his presence filling the room like smoke, invisible but suffocating. Morning light caught the silver at his temples, the hard lines of his jaw. He didn't look up from the documents he was reviewing. "Sit," he said finally, his English accented but precise. Talia sat in the leather chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She'd dealt with intimidating people before, senior archivists who protected their collections like dragons, researchers who treated her as beneath notice. But Viktor Romanov was different. He radiated violence the way other men radiated cologne. "Katya tells me you're an archivist," he said, still not looking at her. "City records, immigration, property deeds." "Yes. Public records, accessible databases." Now his eyes lifted, pinning her in place. "You know how to find information that people would prefer stayed hidden." It wasn't a question, but Talia answered anyway. "That's essentially the job description. People come to me when they need to trace property ownership, verify immigration documentation, establish historical precedent for legal cases." "Show me." He slid a folder across the desk. "These are property records. 3 buildings in Red Hook, Brooklyn. I need to know who really owns them. The shell companies, the holding corporations. I need to see through the layers to the actual name at the center." Talia opened the folder, her professional instincts overriding her fear. The documents were a deliberate maze, LLCs registered in Delaware, holding companies nested inside other holding companies, addresses that led to law offices rather than actual owners. It was designed to obscure, to hide. She'd seen this structure before, though usually in cases involving tax evasion, not— She stopped herself from completing that thought. "I'd need access to my databases," she said carefully. "The city record system, the Secretary of State business entity search, possibly federal tax records depending on— You'll have a laptop, secured, monitored." Victor leaned back in his chair, regarding her the way one might regard a potentially useful tool. "You try to send an email, make a call, access anything beyond what I've authorized, and you'll discover how quickly luxury becomes imprisonment. Understood?" "Understood." "Good." He stood, signaling the conversation's end. Then, as she reached the door, "Katya believes you're intelligent, that your quiet nature makes you observant rather than weak. I think you're a liability with a temporarily useful skill set. Prove me wrong, Miss Bennett, and you might survive long enough to go home." The laptop appeared an hour later, delivered by one of Victor's silent guards. Talia set it up in the sitting room while Anya colored at her feet, the child's presence somehow both comforting and heartbreaking. She logged into the city records database using credentials that shouldn't have worked from this location. Victor's reach was clearly extensive, and began to work. The research itself was soothing in its familiarity. She traced the first property through 3 shell companies, cross-referenced incorporation dates with property transfers, followed the thread of ownership, until a name emerged. Mikhail Volkov, the same family Katya had mentioned, the enemy. But as she worked, Talia began to see the larger pattern. These weren't just properties, they were strategic locations, warehouses near shipping ports, buildings adjacent to the financial district, real estate that controlled access points throughout the city. This was a map of territory, of power, of a war being waged in property deeds and corporate registrations. She was still working when Katya entered, moving with that predatory grace that made Talia's pulse spike. Katya glanced at Anya, who had fallen asleep on the sofa, then at Talia's screen. "Finding anything useful?" "Everything," Talia said quietly. "Your enemies aren't just buying property, They're surrounding you, cutting off supply routes, access points. It's a siege conducted through real estate. Katya moved closer, leaning over Talia's shoulder to study the screen. She smelled of leather and something sharp, gun oil perhaps. Her proximity was overwhelming, electric. Talia's breath caught. "Show me," Katya said, her voice low. Talia pulled up the map she'd been building, color-coding properties by ownership. Red for Volkov Holdings, blue for Romanov, gray for contested or unknown. The red was slowly encircling the blue, a noose tightening. "Bože moi," Katya breathed, and Talia felt the words against her cheek, felt the tension in Katya's body as understanding dawned. Victor needs to see this, but she didn't move. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched, crystallized, became something neither had intended. Katya's hand rested on the back of Talia's chair, close enough that Talia could feel its heat. Their faces were inches apart, Katya still leaning over to see the screen, Talia frozen in place. "You're afraid of me," Katya said softly, and it wasn't quite a question. "Yes," Talia admitted, because lying seemed pointless. "But not for the reasons you think." Katya's eyes searched hers, ice blue and intense. "Then why?" "Because you're beautiful and terrifying and I can't predict you," Talia thought, but didn't say. "Because I spent last night convinced I was going to die, and now I'm mapping your war, and somewhere in the chaos, I stopped being afraid of dying and started being afraid of what I'm feeling." "Because I don't understand what's happening," Talia said instead, which was also true. Katya straightened abruptly, the moment shattering. But something had shifted. Talia could see it in the way Katya's jaw tightened, the way she turned toward the window as if needing distance. "I'll get Victor," Katya said, her voice carefully neutral. "What you found, it changes things." She left quickly, and Talia sat alone with her racing heart and the sleeping child, and the growing, terrifying realization that she was no longer thinking about escape. She was thinking about the woman who just walked away, about the ghost of almost touch, about the way danger and desire had somehow become indistinguishable. Outside, snow began to fall again, burying the world in white silence. Talia learned to work in the spaces between Victor's attention. He was always there, a shadow in the periphery, standing by the windows during her morning research sessions, appearing silently in doorways when Katya lingered too long over Talia's shoulder, watching with those calculating eyes that missed nothing. The penthouse felt less like a gilded cage and more like a surveillance state, every glance monitored, every interaction weighed for weakness. She was refining the property map when Victor materialized behind her chair, close enough that she felt his presence like a cold front moving in. Talia forced herself not to flinch, kept her fingers steady on the keyboard, even as her pulse kicked into overdrive. "Impressive," he said, the word devoid of warmth. He studied her screen with the focus of a general reviewing battlefield positions. "You've identified 17 additional Volkov acquisitions that our own intelligence missed. Either you're exceptionally competent or exceptionally lucky." "Pattern recognition," Talia said quietly. "It's what I'm good at." Victor moved to stand where he could see both her and the doorway, his default position, always controlling the exits, always positioned to intercept. "And what patterns do you see developing here, Miss Bennett, beyond the obvious territorial encroachment?" Talia pulled up a timeline overlay, showing acquisition dates. "They're accelerating. 6 months ago, 1 property every 3 weeks. Now it's 3 per week. They're either preparing for something imminent or responding to pressure. Either way, the pace suggests urgency." "Or desperation," Victor observed. Then, after a pause, "You understand that this information makes you valuable, and that valuable things in our world become targets." It wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the same clinical detachment he might use to discuss weather patterns. Talia met his gaze directly, something she'd trained herself to do despite every instinct screaming to look away. "I understand." "Do you?" Victor's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his eyes. "I've watched you these past days, Watched how you move around Katya like she's a loaded weapon you're afraid to touch. Watched how you look at her when you think no one's paying attention. He leaned closer, voice dropping. Feelings are liabilities, Miss Bennett. They make you predictable, exploitable. And in this house, they will get you killed. Heat flooded Talia's face, but she held his stare. I'm here to do research. Nothing more. See that you remember that. Victor straightened, adjusting his cufflinks with precise, deliberate movements. Then, almost grudgingly, though I will say this, your neutrality has its uses. You're not family, not sworn to us, not entangled in the old grudges and blood debts that poison everything else. When you analyze the data, you see patterns we're too close to notice. Katya was right about that at least. It was the closest thing to a compliment Talia had heard from him. Delivered like a man admitting to a minor miscalculation. Before she could respond, Anya burst into the room, clutching a drawing, and Victor's entire demeanor shifted. The cold assessment vanished, replaced by something almost tender as he knelt to examine the child's artwork. Beautiful, Malishka, he murmured, genuine warmth in his voice. Show Talia what you've made. Anya scrambled over, proudly displaying a crayon rendering of what might have been a garden or possibly a forest fire. It was hard to tell. Talia made appropriately admiring sounds, and when she looked up, she found Victor watching her again, but this time, his expression was different, thoughtful. You're gentle with her, he said quietly. Not performing, not trying to curry favor, just kind. He stood, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. Perhaps there's more to you than skillful database searches after all. He left before Talia could formulate a response, taking Anya with him to find lunch. The room felt larger in his absence, like she could finally breathe properly again. She turned back to her laptop, but her hands were shaking slightly on the keys. The door opened again, Katya this time, moving into the room like she belonged in every space she occupied. Their eyes met, and Talia saw her own uncertainty reflected back. They hadn't been alone together since that charged moment over the property map, and the memory of it hung between them like static electricity waiting to arc. Victor says you've made progress, Katya said, her voice carefully controlled. Yes, Talia replied, equally careful. The patterns are becoming clearer. But neither of them moved, and Talia wondered if Katya could feel it too. This thing growing in the spaces Victor couldn't quite monitor, dangerous and undeniable as the snow accumulating outside the windows. The explosion happened at 3 a.m. Talia jolted awake to the sound of Victor's voice, sharp and commanding in the hallway, followed by the thunder of footsteps. She grabbed her robe and emerged to find the penthouse transformed into a war room, guards moving with military precision, laptops appearing on every surface, phones pressed to ears speaking rapid Russian. Katya stood by the windows, backlit by the city's glow, her entire body coiled tight. She was dressed in black tactical gear, a gun holstered at her hip, and she looked like exactly what she was, a soldier preparing for battle. What happened? Talia asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know. The Volkovs hit the distillery in Red Hook, Victor said without looking up from his phone. Minor operation, minimal casualties, but the message is clear. They're done with the slow game. Anya? Talia's heart seized. Safe. Locked down in the panic room with 2 guards. Katya's voice was flat, controlled, but Talia heard the razor edge beneath it. They wouldn't dare touch her directly, not yet. But this, she gestured at the chaos around them. This is them announcing they're willing to escalate. Victor barked orders in Russian, then switched to English as he turned to Talia. You need to pack. We're moving you to a safe house upstate within the hour. You've become too visible here to... No, Katya interrupted, her eyes still on the window. She stays. The room went quiet. Even the guards paused, sensing the shift in dynamics. Victor's expression hardened. This isn't negotiable, Katya. The Volkovs know about her now. They'll have surveillance footage from the building, informants reporting her presence. She's a civilian, unprotected, and they'll use her as leverage the moment it's convenient. I said she stays. Katya finally turned, and Talia saw something fierce and desperate in her eyes. We need her research. The property map, the pattern analysis. It's the only advantage we have right now. Send her away, and we're blind. We have other analysts. None of them see what she sees. Katya moved closer to her uncle, her voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. You said it yourself. Her neutrality is valuable. She's not entangled in the old grudges, doesn't have decades of blood feuds clouding her judgment. When she looks at the data, she sees the truth, not what we want to believe. Victor studied her with those cold, assessing eyes. This isn't about the research. No, Katya admitted quietly. It's not. The moment crystallized, electric with tension. Talia stood frozen, watching this power struggle play out, understanding that she was the fulcrum, but not the one who would tip the balance. You know what happens when we let feelings dictate strategy, Victor said, his voice soft and dangerous. You know what it costs. I know what it costs to lose, Katya shot back. I know what happens when we're so afraid of feeling anything that we make decisions from fear instead of strength. She gestured toward Anya's room. I stayed in this life for her. To protect her from the consequences of choices made before she was born. To give her a chance at something better than this endless cycle of violence and paranoia. But I can't do that alone, and I can't do it by becoming so cold that I can't recognize an asset when I see one. Is that what she is to you? Victor asked, watching his niece carefully. An asset? Katya's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. She's someone who chose to help us when she could have run. Someone who's gentle with Anya, even though she's terrified. Someone who deserves better than to be discarded the moment she becomes inconvenient. A pause. And yes, someone I want to protect. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Victor was silent for a long moment, his gaze shifting between Katya and Talia. Finally he sighed. If she stays, she's your responsibility, completely. The Volkovs come for her, that's on you. Understood. And you? Victor turned to Talia, his expression unreadable. This is your last chance to choose the sensible option. Walk away now, and we'll ensure you're protected until this is over. Stay, and you're part of it. All of it. There's no neutral ground in a war. Talia's mind raced through the rational arguments for leaving, safety, sanity, survival. But when she looked at Katya, saw the fierce protectiveness in her eyes, the weight of responsibility she carried for a child who called her mama, the loneliness beneath all that deadly competence, the choice was already made. I'm staying, Talia said, her voice steadier than she felt. Not because I'm trapped, because I choose to. Katya's expression shifted. Something vulnerable flashing across her features before she locked it down, but her eyes said everything her voice couldn't. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, and snow continued to fall on a city at war. The phone call came 2 days after the distillery fire, patched through Victor's secure line, because someone had been persistent enough to trigger his external monitoring systems. Talia was deep in property records, cross-referencing offshore corporate structures, when Victor appeared in the doorway with an expression that promised nothing good. You have a friend, he said, the word dripping with disdain. Rachel Kovacs. She filed a missing persons report with the NYPD yesterday. Apparently you were supposed to have coffee last week and never showed. She's convinced you've been kidnapped. Talia's stomach dropped. Rachel, her college roommate, the one person who actually noticed when she disappeared from her routine. Of course Rachel would escalate to the police. It was exactly the kind of stubborn loyalty that made her a good friend and a terrible complication. I can call her, Talia said quickly. Tell her I'm fine, that I'm just what? Victor moved into the room, his presence immediately oppressive. Working a freelance project? Taking an impromptu vacation? What exactly do you tell someone who knows you well enough to know you would never disappear without notice? He pulled out his phone, scrolled to something, then turned the screen toward her. The detective assigned to the case is Michael Torres. Good reputation, persistent, and currently very interested in the fact that you were last seen entering a building I own. The news article showed Rachel's photo alongside Talia's driver's license picture. "Local woman missing after date goes wrong," the headline read. Talia's chest tightened. They'd gotten it wrong. Jordan wasn't dangerous, just disappointing. But the narrative had taken on its own momentum. "This is exactly what I warned about," Victor continued, his voice sharp. "Civilian entanglements. People who ask questions, who involve authorities, who can't simply be intimidated into silence. You wanted to stay, Miss Bennett, but your old life isn't willing to let you go." "I can fix this." "No, you can't." He pocketed his phone. "A phone call won't satisfy the police now that they're involved. They'll want to see you, verify you're safe. Probably ask why you're living in a building owned by a man whose business dealings they've been investigating for years. And the moment they connect those dots, you become a witness. Someone they'll want to talk to, possibly subpoena, definitely monitor." Talia felt the walls closing in. She'd been so focused on the choice to stay, on Katya and Anya and the strange purpose she'd found in this dangerous new world, that she hadn't considered the logistics of simply vanishing from her old one. "So what do you suggest?" she asked quietly. "Because sending me away doesn't solve the problem either. Rachel will keep pushing, the police will keep investigating, and eventually you become more trouble than you're worth," Victor finished. "Which is my point exactly. I gave you a chance, allowed you to stay against my better judgment. And now we're dealing with exactly the kind of exposure that gets people killed. Then let me talk to them." Katya's voice cut through the room like a blade. She'd entered silently, still in tactical gear from the morning's security briefing, and she looked furious. "I'll accompany Talia to the precinct. She makes a statement that she's fine, shows her face, answers their questions, case closed." "Don't be naive," Victor snapped. "The moment she walks into that building, we lose control of the narrative. They'll separate you, interview her alone, and what do you think happens when they ask why she's living with us? When they press about what she's seen, what she knows? She tells them the truth, that she's doing research work, that she's here voluntarily, that she's not in danger. And when they ask about the distillery fire, the Volkov properties, the pattern of violence that's been escalating across the city," Victor's voice was cold. "She's intelligent, Katya. They'll see that immediately. They'll assume she knows more than she's saying, and they won't stop digging until they find leverage to make her talk." The Romanov Christmas Eve gathering transformed the penthouse into something from another era. Crystal chandeliers throwing prismatic light across tables laden with caviar and champagne. Guests in formal wear speaking in hushed Russian. The air thick with expensive perfume and carefully concealed weapons. Talia had never seen so many dangerous people pretending to celebrate peace on Earth. She wore a dress Katya had selected, deep emerald silk that made her feel exposed and elegant in equal measure. Victor had briefed her twice. His instructions precise: circulate naturally, avoid drawing attention, and at exactly 9:30, engage Dmitry Volkov in conversation near the east windows while appearing to admire the view. "He'll have his phone," Victor had said, watching her with those calculating eyes. "Password protected, but he's arrogant enough to keep it in his jacket pocket rather than with his security. You'll have 90 seconds while Katya creates a distraction. Access his messages, photograph anything related to Red Harbor, then return it without him noticing." "And if I can't get to it?" Talia had asked. "Then people die," Victor replied simply. "Possibly you." Now, watching Dmitry Volkov work the room, tall, silver-haired, radiating the same cold authority as Victor, Talia felt her pulse hammering. This wasn't analyzing property records from the safety of a laptop. This was walking into the heart of enemy territory and betting everything that she could pull off a deception against people who killed for less. Katya appeared at her elbow, devastating in black velvet, her hand settling briefly at the small of Talia's back. "You don't have to do this," she murmured, close enough that Talia could smell her perfume, something dark and complex that made her thoughts scatter. "I can find another way." "There is no other way," Talia said, repeating Victor's words from the briefing. "Red Harbor is the key. Whatever they're planning, it happens soon. and we need those messages. If anything goes wrong, then you get Anya out. Talia turned to face her, held those ice blue eyes. That's the priority. Not me. Not this operation. Her. Something shifted in Katya's expression, fierce and protective and terrified all at once. She opened her mouth to argue, but the clock was moving. 9:25. Talia touched Katya's hand once, briefly, then moved toward the windows. Dmitri was holding court with two oligarchs and a federal judge whose presence alone suggested how deep the corruption ran. Talia positioned herself near enough to overhear, pretending interest in the Manhattan skyline, the Empire State Building lit red and green for the holiday. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said softly as Dmitri's companions moved away. "I never get tired of this view." He turned, assessed her with the cold appraisal of a man who calculated the value of everything. "Victor's new pet," he said in accented English. "The researcher. I heard you've been making yourself useful." "Just doing my job." Talia kept her voice light, unthreatening. "Though I have to say the property transfers I've been tracking are fascinating. The strategy behind them is almost elegant." Dmitri's eyes sharpened with interest and suspicion in equal measure. "Strategy?" "The way certain holdings create pressure points, control access." Talia let the sentence trail off, as if she'd said too much. "I shouldn't discuss work at a party." "No," Dmitri agreed, stepping closer. "You shouldn't." That's when the lights went out. The penthouse plunged into darkness for exactly 3 seconds, long enough for panic to ripple through the crowd, for bodyguards to move toward their principals, for Talia's hand to slip into Dmitri's jacket pocket and extract his phone. The emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in dim amber light and in the chaos of raised voices and nervous laughter. Talia's fingers flew across the screen. Password, 6 digits. She tried the obvious. Birth dates, common codes, nothing. Her pulse thundered. 60 seconds gone. She could feel Dmitri's attention starting to shift back, feel the moment slipping away. Then she remembered. The property records, the first major Volkov acquisition. The date, 08 when and 956. She entered it, and the phone unlocked. Messages. Red Harbor. She photographed 3 screens in rapid succession, catching names, locations, a timeline that made her blood run cold. Tomorrow. They were moving tomorrow, Christmas Day, when half of Victor's security would be with family. She slipped the phone back just as the main lights returned. Dmitri's hand went immediately to his pocket, checking, and Talia held her breath. But he relaxed, turned back to her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Faulty wiring," someone announced. "Nothing to worry about." Across the room, Katya caught her gaze, the question clear. Talia gave the smallest nod. "Enjoy the party, Miss Bennett," Dmitri said, already dismissing her as he moved toward Victor with predatory intent. Talia walked calmly to the bathroom, locked the door, and only then let herself shake. The gunfire started during dessert. Talia was still in the bathroom, downloading the photographs from her phone to Victor's secure server, when the first shots shattered the penthouse's festive facade. Screams erupted, followed by the thunder of return fire, and she froze with her finger hovering over the send button as her mind struggled to process what was happening. They weren't supposed to attack tonight. Red Harbor was scheduled for tomorrow, unless the phone had been bait. Unless Dmitri had wanted her to find those messages, wanted Victor's attention focused on Christmas Day, while the real assault came now, when the penthouse was packed with witnesses and collateral damage. Talia's hands steadied. She hit send, heard the confirming chime, then pulled up the building's security interface that Victor had given her limited access to for her research. The cameras showed chaos in the main room, Volkov soldiers pouring in through the service entrance, guests diving for cover, Victor's guards forming a protective ring that was already collapsing under concentrated fire. Katya was pinned behind the bar with 3 guards, cut off from Victor by a crossfire that made movement suicide. And Anya. Talia's heart stopped. The panic room. Anya was supposed to be in the panic room, but the camera showed its door standing open. The guards who should have been protecting her sprawled motionless in the hallway. Someone had gotten to them first, disabled the backup protocols, and now the child was missing. Every instinct screamed at Talia to hide, to stay locked in this bathroom until the violence ended one way or another. She was a researcher, not a soldier. She had no training for this, no weapons, no way to fight people who killed as easily as breathing. But she had the floor plans memorized. She had access codes Victor had given her for the secondary systems, and she knew exactly where a terrified 4-year-old would hide when the world exploded into gunfire. Talia unlocked the bathroom door and slipped into the service corridor, her heart hammering so hard she could barely hear over it. The penthouse was a maze if you didn't know its secrets, but she'd spent weeks studying its architecture, mapping its patterns the same way she mapped corporate structures. The guest rooms connected through a servant's passage that hadn't been used in decades. Anya's playroom had a closet that backed onto that passage, and the lock was the old-fashioned kind that could be opened from either side if you knew where to press. She moved quickly through the dimness, her silk dress a liability that she hiked up with shaking hands. Behind her, the firefight intensified, someone screaming in Russian, the distinctive crack of Victor's preferred pistol, the crash of breaking glass. She forced herself not to look back, not to think about Katya trapped and fighting for her life. The playroom was dark and quiet, insulated from the chaos by thick walls and closed doors. Talia pressed her ear against the closet, listening. Nothing. Then, so faint she almost missed it. A child's terrified breathing. "Anya," she whispered in Russian, one of the few phrases Katya had taught her. "It's Talia, we need to go." Silence. Then, "Mama? Mama's fighting. She needs us to be brave. Can you be brave?" The lock clicked. The door opened a crack, and Anya's tear-stained face appeared, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Talia gathered her up, felt the child's arms lock around her neck with desperate strength, and turned back toward the servants' passage. That's when she heard footsteps, heavy, purposeful, moving toward the playroom from the main corridor, not Victor's guards. Not running toward the fight but away from it, toward the most valuable target in the entire penthouse. Talia's mind raced. The passage led to the service elevator, but that would be monitored, trapped. The main stairs were suicide. But there was another option. The emergency fire escape that connected to the building's original heating system, a route so old and forgotten that it didn't appear on modern blueprints. She'd found it only because she'd cross-referenced the 1920s construction documents with current floor plans, noticed the discrepancy. She moved silently through the passage, Anya's face buried against her shoulder, and found the access panel exactly where the old documents promised. Her fingers fumbled with the latch, slick with sweat, as the footsteps grew closer. It opened with a groan of protesting metal, revealing a narrow shaft and a ladder descending into darkness. No time to think. Talia climbed down one-handed, Anya clinging to her like a monkey, her designer heels abandoned on the floor above. The shaft was freezing, decades of accumulated grime coating the rungs, and her muscles screamed in protest. But she kept moving, down through the skeleton of the building, until she reached the sub-basement. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, sent a text to Katya's emergency number. "Have a, sub-basement, near utility room." The reply came instantly. "Stay there." Above, the gunfire was fading. Either the fight was ending or moving to a different part of the building. Talia found the utility room, a forgotten space full of ancient boilers and rusted pipes, and wedged herself and Anya into the darkest corner. The child had stopped crying, gone eerily quiet in the way of trauma, and Talia held her close, murmuring nonsense comfort, while her own terror threatened to choke her. 15 minutes passed. 20. Then footsteps again, but different this time, quick, light, familiar. The door burst open and Katya appeared, blood spattered across her face and dress, her gun still drawn. Her eyes found them in the darkness, and something in her expression cracked. "Boże moi," she breathed, crossing the space in 3 strides. She holstered her weapon and pulled them both into her arms, shaking. "How did you—" "Old blueprints," Talia said, her voice surprisingly steady. "The 1924 renovation left a gap in the security systems. I noticed it weeks ago. Katya pulled back enough to look at her, and in her eyes, Talia saw something beyond gratitude, beyond relief, recognition, understanding. The phone data, Katya said. Victor used it. We knew exactly where they'd position their people, exactly when they'd move. We turned their trap into ours. She touched Talia's face, gentle despite the violence still coating her hands. You saved us. All of us. Upstairs, Victor's voice echoed through the building's intercom. All clear, targets neutralized. But Katya didn't move, and neither did Talia. They stayed in that dark utility room, holding Anya between them, and Talia understood that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't the liability Victor had predicted. She wasn't the civilian Katya had tried to protect. She was something else entirely now, something she was still learning how to name. The penthouse looked like a war zone. Shattered glass crunched underfoot, bullet holes scarred the walls, and dark stains spread across the marble floors that Talia tried not to identify. Victor's cleaning crew was already at work, moving with practiced efficiency that suggested this wasn't the first time they'd erased evidence of violence from expensive real estate. Katya had taken Anya to the least damaged guest room, settling the traumatized child with hot chocolate and her stuffed rabbit while whispering soothing Russian endearments. Talia stood in the doorway, watching, feeling simultaneously vital to this moment and superfluous to it. This was their world, Katya's and Anya's, Victor's and the guards. Talia was still the outsider, the civilian who'd stumbled into something she'd never been meant to see. She's asking for you, Katya said softly, and Talia blinked in surprise. Me? You're the one who found her. Who kept her safe. Katya's expression was complex, layered with things Talia couldn't quite parse. Come. Talia crossed to the bed where Anya sat propped against pillows, her small face still pale with shock. The child reached out immediately, and Talia sat carefully on the mattress edge, letting Anya's hand find hers. The bad men are gone? Anya asked in halting English, her accent thick. They're gone, Talia confirmed. Your mama made sure of it. And you, Anya's grip tightened. You found me in the dark. I did. Like a spy? Despite everything, the violence, the terror, the blood still probably staining her hands, Talia found herself smiling. Something like that. Katya's hand settled on Talia's shoulder, warm and grounding. They stayed like that until Anya's eyes grew heavy, until her breathing evened into sleep. Only then did Katya gently extract Talia from the room, leading her into the hallway where Victor waited. He looked exactly as dangerous as he was, blood spatter across his shirt, his weapon visible in its shoulder holster, his eyes sharp with the aftermath of violence. But when he saw Anya sleeping peacefully through the open door, something in his expression gentled. The Volkov's second in command is dead, he said without preamble. Dmitri escaped, but he's lost half his organization and all his credibility. This war is over. We won. Because of the intelligence, Katya said, her hand still on Talia's shoulder. The phone data gave us their positions, their timing, everything we needed to turn their attack into a slaughter. Victor's gaze shifted to Talia, assessing in that way she'd grown familiar with over the past weeks. But this time, there was something different in it. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. You have a choice to make, Miss Bennett, he said, moving closer. I can arrange for your disappearance from public record, satisfy the police investigation, compensate your friend Rachel for her concern, ensure you can return to your old life with minimal complications. You'll sign an NDA with teeth, accept a generous severance package, and walk away from this world completely. Talia's heart hammered. Or you stay. Not as a hostage, not as a liability, but as part of this organization. We need someone who can navigate the legal structures, who can see patterns in corporate mazes, who can legitimize our operations in ways that keep us ahead of both rivals and regulators. He paused, his expression unreadable. And Katya needs someone who can help her build something better than what we've inherited. Someone who isn't just loyal to the old ways, but intelligent enough to evolve them. You're offering me a job, Talia said slowly. In the Mafia. I'm offering you a partnership. With protections, with autonomy, and yes, with dangers, you'd be a fool to dismiss. Victor's voice was steady, clinical. But you've already proven you're not a fool. You're someone who sees clearly, acts decisively, and protects what matters. Those qualities are rare, valuable. Talia looked at Katya, found those ice-blue eyes watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was no pressure there, no expectation, just a question, honest and vulnerable in a way Katya rarely allowed herself to be. I can't promise safety, Katya said quietly. I can't promise normal or easy or anything resembling the life you had before. What I can promise is that if you choose this, choose us. I will protect you with everything I have, you and Anya both. Us, Talia repeated, testing the word. If you want there to be an us. Katya's hand slid from Talia's shoulder to her hand, their fingers intertwining. I know it's insane. I know the timing is terrible, that we barely know each other, that I'm probably the worst possible person for you to... Talia kissed her. Cut off the spiral of words with her lips, tasted champagne and gunpowder, and something indefinably Katya. The world narrowed to this moment. The softness of Katya's mouth, the sharp intake of her breath, the way her free hand came up to cradle Talia's face with unexpected gentleness. When they broke apart, Victor was already walking away, giving them privacy with a discretion Talia hadn't expected from him. Through the guest room door, Anya stirred in her sleep, murmuring something in Russian that sounded like contentment. I'm staying, Talia said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Not because I'm afraid to leave, not because I don't understand what I'm choosing, but because when I think about walking away from this, from you, from her, nothing else makes sense anymore. Katya's smile was slow, transformative, like dawn breaking over dangerous territory. She pulled Talia close again, rested their foreheads together, and whispered something in Russian that Talia didn't understand, but felt in her bones. What does that mean? Talia asked. It means welcome home, Katya translated, then kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and danger and fierce, terrifying hope. In the guest room, Anya's small voice called out sleepily, Mama, is Talia staying? Katya broke the kiss, her eyes never leaving Talia's. Yes, Malishka, she's staying. Good, Anya said, already drifting back to sleep. I like her. Outside the windows, snow fell on Christmas morning, blanketing the city in white. Somewhere in the penthouse, Victor's guards were still cleaning up the evidence of violence, still securing the perimeter, still maintaining the machinery of power that kept them all alive. But in this moment, in this room, Talia held Katya's hand and felt something she hadn't expected to find in this dark, dangerous world. Belonging. She'd chosen chaos. She'd chosen love. She'd chosen a family forged not in blood, but in fire. And she'd never felt more certain of anything in her life,